Hello there. Let's talk about variables. But before we get started, let me tell you that although the primary focus for this video will be variables, related concepts like data types and literals will also come into picture. So if you're familiar with those concepts, great. You can continue watching this video to get a better understanding of variables in Java. If not, I have a suggestion for you. You can watch this video where I have talked specifically about data types and this video where I have talked specifically about literals. Or you can watch this video where we had taken a very high level view of how data types, literals, and variables work together in a Java program. So with that said and done, let's continue with variables. Variables, by definition, are the smallest unit of storage in a Java program, which means we use variables when we want to store some value in our Java program. But before we can store some value, we will need to create a variable. So let's first of all talk about how can we create a variable in a Java program. For that, the syntax is simple. We'll have to specify the type of variable and the name of variable. The type over here could be one of the 8 primitive types available in Java or one of the complex types supported by Java. And the name over here is the name of the variable, which is an identifier. And as we know already, identifiers are used to name various parts of the program, for example, variables or methods or class. Now, as the variable name is an identifier, it needs to follow all of the rules that is laid out for an identifier. So with this understood, let's open IntelliJ and create a variable. But for that, I'll first of all create a separate class and I'll name this variable. And I'll also have a main method. Then inside this, using the syntax that we have just discussed, wherein we need to provide the type and the name and end this statement with a semicolon, let's create a variable of int type and let's name this variable as I1. And we will end this with a semicolon, of course. Now, if I run the code, but before that, as you can see, it says hello world, which means it will run the hello world class. Let's change this to current file and run the code. And although it did not print anything because we do not have a system.out.println statement in this Java program, the code compiled and executed without any errors, which means this is a valid statement. Now we have created just one variable of int type, but what if we want to create many variables of int type itself? What can we do? We've got two options. The first one is to create one variable on each line this way. So int I2 on line number 5, then int say I3 on line number 6, and so on. Another option is to create many variables in one single line. And let's see how can that be done. So for that, let's come to line number 8 and let's say int I4. And if I end this statement with a semicolon, it will create just one variable in line number 8. However, if we want to create multiple variables of the same type on the same line, we can do this. After we have specified the name of one variable, we can put a comma and then we can say, for example, I5, which is the name of another variable. And then we can say, for example, I6 and I7 and so on. So what's happening in line number 8? Over here, we have created 4 variables named I4, I5, I6, and I7, and all of them are of int type. But in line numbers 4, 5, and 6, we've created 3 variables, I1, I2, and I3. They also belong to the int type, but we have created 3 variables on 3 different lines. Both of these are valid, and how you create them depends on your preference. So this was about creating a variable of the same type. But what if we want to create variables of multiple types together? Again, we've got two options. One, where we can create multiple variables of different types on the same line, and the other one where we can create multiple variables of different types on different lines. Let's talk about the second one first, which is creating multiple variables of different types on different lines. So I can say maybe int I8 and this is a semicolon. Then I can say float F1, then say double D1 and so on. Now, if I want to create 3 variables of different types on the same line, this is what I can do. Char C1, end this statement with a semicolon and then put a space or not, both are fine. But by convention, you should put a space and we can say Boolean B1. So over here, what I have done is created 2 variables of different types on the same line. So notice how this differs from creating multiple variables of the same type on the same line. When you create multiple variables of the same type on the same line, You separate the variable names with a comma and then end the statement with a semicolon. However, if you create multiple variables of different types on the same line, you need to end each of these statements with a semicolon. And of course, we also have another option where we can create multiple variables of the same type on different lines, or multiple variables of different types on different lines. So this covers how we can create variables in Java, be it of different types on the same line, or of different types on different lines, or of same type on same line, or of same type on different lines. So this is how we can create variables in a Java program. But the primary purpose of creating a variable in a Java program is to store some value in it. Now we can either store value in a variable while we are creating it, or we can store a value in a variable after we have created a variable. So let's take examples to understand both of these. For example, if you want to create variable I1 and while creating it, you want to assign 10 to it, this is what you can do. You can say int I1 is equal to 10. And this statement will create a variable called I1 and assign 10 to it. But for whatsoever reason you want to assign a value to a variable after you have created it, this is what you can do. You would need to specify the name of the variable. Let's take B1, for example, which is of Boolean type. And to B1, I want to assign false. So I can say B1 is equal to false. So in line number 4, we assigned a value to a variable while creating the variable. But in line number 16, we assigned a value to a variable after we had created the variable. Both of them are syntactically correct, and which one you use depends on the need and the usage. So before discussing further, let's quickly print the values of I1 and B1, the two variables that we have initialized. So if I run the code now, I get 10 and false, which are the values that we had initialized I1 and B1 to. Now, what will happen if I print I2? Well, if I do that, you can see that we are getting an error, and the error message reads variable I2 might not have been initialized. So if you have a variable created in your Java program and you use it without initializing a value to it, you will get an error, and that error will read this variable and then the name of the variable and then might not have been initialized. So let's get rid of the statement at line number 21 and let's discuss further. Now, as you can see, what I have done in line number 4 is initialize 10 to I1. 10 is an integer literal, which means once I1 has been initialized to 10, it will remain 10 whole throughout the program until and unless you change that value somewhere down the line. So what I mean is this. If I print I1 over here in line number 18 and then I go to line number 23 and I say I1 is equal to 100, and then I print I1 again and I run the code, I get 10 first because of this println statement, which prints the value of I1, and the value of I1 over here is 10. Then we get false printed because of println statement on line number 19. And then lastly, we get 100 printed because we reinitialize the value of I1 to 100. So this is how you can assign static values to the variables. Now, Java also allows us to assign values to a variable using an expression. For example, if I take, let's say, variable I2 and I say that I want to initialize I2 with I1 multiplied with, say, 9, and I end the statement with a semicolon. As you can see, there's no error, and if I run the code, it will work absolutely fine. The outputs will be 10, false, and 100, and we already know why that is the case. Now, if I come back to the code and I print the value of I2 in line number 27, what do we expect? Well, according to this statement, the latest value of I1 is 100, because although we initialized I1 to 10 here, we have reinitialized I1 to 100 in line number 23, and by the time the control reaches line number 26, the value of I1 has changed to 100, which means 100 into 9, which is 900, will be initialized to the variable I2. So if I run the code, I get 900 as the output. Now, can I do this while I am creating a variable? Well, of course, yes. So if I come back to line number 5 and I say int I2 is equal to I1 into, say, 10, what do we expect the value of I2 to be? Well, by line number 5, the value of I1 is 10. So I expect I2 to have 10 into 10, which is 100. To check that, let's put a system.out.println statement here, and let's print the value of I2. And since this is the first println statement, the first line of output, which is 100, will print the value of I2. So this is how we can assign values to variables in our Java program. Now, another important point over here is that the value that we put in a particular variable should be compatible. For example, if I have, let's say, B1, which is of type Boolean, I can put true or false and Java won't throw any errors because it is a valid value considering the data type that we have used. But if we say B1 is equal to 1000, for example, we will get an error and it will say required type is Boolean, but we have provided int, which means 1000 over here, which is an int, is not compatible to the Boolean data type. Now, another important point is an identifier does not have anything intrinsic in their name. What do I mean is, if I create a variable called num, which is of type int, just by naming this variable num, Java will not internally assume it to be of type int. So if you put the type as int, that's fine. If you put this as Boolean, even then it's fine. As you can see, this line is not giving any errors. And if I run the code, it will work absolutely fine. There's no errors that is being printed here. Next, let's talk about scope and lifetime of a variable. Now we know that there's something called block in Java, which starts with an opening curly brace and which ends with a closing curly brace. Taking a look at the variable class, we can see that we've got a block associated to the class, which starts in line number 1 and ends in line number 4. Similarly, we have a block associated to the main method starting at line number 2 and ending at line number 33. Now, this block defines scope. And every time you start a new block, you're creating a new scope. Now, what's the significance or importance of the scope? Well, a scope will determine what's visible to other parts of a program. For example, if you have a variable here, say I1 of type int, and this falls under the block of main method. This means that I1 will be visible or say available only inside the main method. So I1 will begin to exist right after creating it, and it will continue to exist until the main method ends, which means if you try to access I1 over here in say line number 35, which is after the closing curly brace of the main method, you will not be able to access I1. Or if you try to access I1 before it is created, for example, if you say shift this to line number 6 and you try to access I1 over here in line number 4, and the error will say cannot resolve symbol I1. So what does this tell us about the lifetime of the variable? It tells us that a variable will begin to exist right after it is created, and it will continue to exist till the end of the block it is contained in. So you cannot access that variable after the block ends or before it is created, even if you are in that block in which the variable is created. And of course, you cannot access a variable created in one block in another block. Also, as we have seen in this program, we can create a variable anywhere. It can be at the start of the block it is in, or it can also come somewhere in the middle. It can also come at the end. But of course, creating a variable at the end is not useful because no part of the program will be able to access it. Now, let's get rid of the statement in line number 4 and let's focus our attention to this statement. Here you can see that we have a variable called I1 of type int, which is assigned 10. And in the next line, we have I2, which is assigned a value I1 times 10. Now, both of these variables are declared to be of int type, and the value that we have assigned are int itself. And that is why there's no error over here. But if you assign a value to a variable which it is not compatible with, it will give an error. For example, if I go to the end and I say num is equal to say 13, we get an error because num is of Boolean type, which means it can store true or false. But what we are doing is storing 13 in it, which is incompatible with Boolean. Likewise, if you create a variable, say I10, and you assign it with 3.14, it will give an error because 3.14 is of double type and you're trying to assign it to a variable of int type, which it is not compatible with. And this does not hold only to literals that you assign to it. It also holds true for the dynamic initialization that you can do to a variable. For example, if I say int I10 is equal to 19 multiplied with say 2, this is fine. But the moment I say 2.1, it will give an error because this dynamic assignment is ultimately resulting into a value of double type. So this tells us that every variable in Java has a type and every expression in Java has a type. And those types are strictly checked for compatibility. And if there are any mismatches, like is the case here in line number 34, Java will not successfully compile the class and you'll have to correct it before Java successfully compiles the file. So this brings us to the end of the video. Summarizing, we talked about how can we create a variable in Java and how can we assign values to it. We also saw how can we create multiple variable of the same type on the same line, then multiple variable of different types on the same line, multiple variable of same type on different lines, and multiple variable of different types on different lines. Then we talked about how can we assign values to a variable and discussed how to assign static values with the help of literals or dynamic values with the help of expressions. Then we also talked about scope and lifetime of a variable. And lastly, we talked about Java being a strongly typed language, which means all of the variables and the assignments to it, be it static or dynamic, are strictly checked for type, and any type incompatibility will throw an error, and that error needs to be rectified before Java compiler compiles the class. I hope I've been able to teach you something new and useful. If you have any suggestions, feedback, or queries, feel free to put them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.